Well, welcome to week 2 of the spring session that we've entitled Hide and Seek. We've entitled it this way because of the fact that there are things in every one of our lives, not simply that we are trying to sheepishly ignore or maybe we don't know are there, but things that we do know that are there, but we don't really know how to face them, or we don't want to face them. Things like pride and envy, or lust, or greed, whatever those things may be, they're relational hindrances to us being at our best in the places where we find ourselves flourishing as they truly could. So tonight we're going to take a look at a big word called pride. I don't know if you've ever noticed it in your own life or seen the way that it can do damage in relationships or even to us personally. But tonight we're going to unpack that a little bit and then begin to talk about an antidote to this thing called pride. Stay with us. I think you're going to enjoy it this evening. Well, listen, I want to review for all of us tonight before we move forward, and I want to, particularly for the new guys as well, but last week we began to talk about this new series. You guys know what we're talking about in the spring. Every spring, every series, we do something different, and this one we've entitled what? It should be right behind me, I think. Hide and Seek. This is a little slow group, so we kind of give you some little helpers there, Gary. You know what I mean? Kind of helping guys out a little bit. But do you guys remember anything that we talked about last week from anybody who was here? Just anything in order, and we'll take it and run with it. Just for way of review, it's just very, very important for guys to connect on some of this. We're talking about hide and seek. What were we referring to or thinking about in that? Yeah, thank you, Dave.
The ripple effects, of like brokenness in our lives and how that impacts our relationships. I think the purpose of what we're doing is to try and explore those so that we can improve our relationships and our ripple effects, for the rest of our lives.
Good. We talked about this little concept of every one of our lives is going to leave a relational mark. Do you guys remember that? What do you guys think again we said by that? Every life is going to leave a relational mark of some type, an imprint, something that's going to outlast you, that other people are going to remember about you, right, Phil? And that's going to be based on what? How do you, basically this way, what do people feel about you when they see you now? Or, what are their thoughts? What do you think that that's rooted in? Huh? Hey, come on in, bro. What do you think?
You're talking about pride?
Pride, but we talked about what determines our relational marker. Don't overthink this. Their feelings about you, how you treat them. These are all realities about this. And it's important. It matters. And we began to talk about the fact that there's certainly things about how we relate to other people that maybe we're not even aware of. Those would be blind spots or certain things that we think and feel about other people that maybe we ignore. We just don't want to deal with it, right, Wayne? Because we don't know how to deal with it. But there's other things that we know and we're just too stubborn to deal with it. Or we prefer, if we don't want to deal with it, what do we tend to do with stuff we don't want to deal with? You internalize, you hide from it, or you pretend it's not there, you cover it up, whatever word you want to use. One of the things you don't do is bring it into the light. You keep it in a place where you just kind of, in your own mind or your spirit, you don't have to deal with it. But here's the problem. It doesn't go away. It finds its way out some way, somehow. And I didn't come up with this. This isn't, I did come up with this, but I didn't come up with what I'm going to tell you about with this. This is a little iceberg illustration. But basically, whatever you think of the person of Jesus, one of the things Jesus said, which I think history bears out, is that everything we do above the waterline, which using an iceberg illustration is very little, comes from a place that's very deep that there's a lot of. 85% of an iceberg you don't see. But what he was trying to say is these relational markers that often get seen in our behavior up here in the visible world, the public world, actually come from someplace down here. And this is brewing all the time. It's shaped by our experiences. It's shaped by our families, our relationships. And ultimately, it's shaped by what you want and how you think about you. And is it accurate or inaccurate? But you're going to take what's going on down here into another place. Trust me. And you may be doing it already right now and don't even know that you are. Or you say, I am doing it and I just don't feel like dealing with it. It's just who I am. People around me have to deal with it. And here's how other people deal with their stuff that you don't want to deal with. They begin to avoid you. Because they don't want to deal with you any more than you don't want to deal with you. But we can have a bigger impact. And I showed you a little clip last week. Do you guys remember that from what? What show was it? Biggest Loser. And I showed you that for this reason. And it was interesting, a lot of people there had some significant weight to lose. It's why they were there. They knew that they had an issue. They just didn't know how to deal with it until they got really in touch with how serious it was. Interestingly, the trainer who was training the people in The Biggest Loser, he's the one that had a heart attack. Literally in real life, just about 6 weeks ago, he had a heart attack, and had they not been there with paddles, he probably wouldn't have made it. The point being that we've all got stuff. Just because you look a certain way doesn't mean you actually are. We've all got stuff under the hood that's there to begin to deal with. And so I began to just ask us to think about this. And how did we get there? That the first game ever to be played in human history was called what? And where was it played first time? In a garden. There's a lot of places to hide in a garden. The only problem with that is it depends on who you're playing with. And if you play with the wrong person, you can't hide any place without being found. And we began to play this with God when we went from this relationship of sheer dependence, where we found our truest self, to where we thought we had a better idea, right, Wayne? And we began to act as though we're independent when we don't know how to be independent. We had all our grandkids over this past weekend, and we got a few of them that are really little. And one of them is Bennett. He's 2. Well, when Bennett goes out the front door, we don't just say, hey, Bennett's out in the front yard, man. He's on his own, man. He's acting independent, so just let him do what he wants. He isn't at that stage yet where he's able to do that. Here's the point. In creation, we're never at that stage. God never created us so we would function well without creating a lot of chaos and havoc in our life when we go independent, if you will. And then we ended last week with talking about 1 John, that it's in the light. If we say we have fellowship with God and yet walk in the darkness, what are we? It's a pretty strong word. We're a hypocrite, we're a liar. And the hope isn't that we have to keep kind of hide all this stuff. The scriptures encourage us, say, but if you would just confess it, if you'd come clean with it, if you'd get in the light with it, God actually knows how to deal with it and release you from it. But then we did list some things that were characteristics that would be hindrances to this relational mark, that when we listed some qualities, or what are some of the qualities or attitudes that we listed, if you can remember from last week, that really do hurt and hinder relationships. Anybody can remember any of them that we listed? Dave, go ahead. Pride. God, you all right, Larry? Yeah. Okay.
Let's get that pride out.
Just a couple more, just to I want to just get the soil going here.
Anger.
Huh? Anger? Great. Yeah. These are some of the ones we're going to deal with. Lust. I knew you guys would come through on that one. Any others? Any other?
Anger.
Anger. Got anger up there. I'm going to give you one. Envy and greed. All right? There's many, many more, but we don't have endless amounts of weeks. This isn't a 52-week series. This is only 8. And we're going to spend 2 on this one. And then we're going to spend a week on forgiveness and confession, and it's going to be a great time. All right? So I want to show you guys something real quickly on the PowerPoint. And before you do, Lonnie, hold on. But before we do, before we do, I want you in just a minute to be able to count with me how many of, can you guys, if I put the, does that help you guys see this a little bit better? All right. How many of the letter F, okay? In just a minute, I'm only going to give you just a short period of time to look at this, all right? And then you can do it. Lonnie, can you get the that illustration up for me? Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
I got 6 of them on the report card.
Larry got 6 of them on his report card. It's not surprising, Larry. I'm sorry about that.
So with the teachers.
Yeah, all right? All right, now here's what I want you to do. I'm going to just give you about 30 seconds. Don't talk, just 30 seconds to try to count the number of F's you see, okay? Just read it, 30 seconds. And don't say anything to anybody else. Don't cheat. 15 more seconds. 5 more seconds. Okay, time's up. Lonnie, we got that? Okay, now, how many of you think there's 4? How many, you got to be bold. How many 4? If we got a number, how many 5? 5. Wow, that's good. How many would say 7? How many say 6? Okay, how many 4? How many 5? 4s and 5s, lift your hands up. Real bold. Come on, fellas, 4s and 5s. Look around. Look around. How many say 6? The answer is 6. Let's go. We have finished is 1, flies is 2, the results of is 3, years of is 4, scientific is 5, study combined with the experience of many years is 6. Now let me ask you, I only said this for this reason. It is easy to miss the obvious, is it not?
Thank you, Mr. Obvious.
Thank you. And I think we can miss it for a lot of reasons. Sometimes we just overlook it. Sometimes we're moving too quickly. Sometimes I think we miss it, though, because it's too painful to face it. And sometimes we don't want to face what is actually going on because of the implications. Let me give you a unique, crazy illustration. A number of years ago, I was at a Young Life camp, and our staff used to play basketball against the campers every week. And our staff had a pretty good record. Like, part of the motto was, whatever it takes, we don't lose. And I know it was a little bit of what we're going to talk about tonight, but we just felt like, because there's always some boys in camp that could bring it and thought they were really, really good, and they were. But so usually first couple of days they hear that the staff's got a team they want to kind of play, and so I'm not the greatest basketball player, but I can run all day. And so one day we were playing, and I play well enough to hold my own, but I got my hand in some place, and right when I stuck my hand in, I took it out, and I looked at it, and I thought, that just doesn't look right. And I felt like something probably was broken, and it started swelling pretty good, but we were in a game, and I didn't want to quit. And in my mind, I'm going, nah, it's not broken, it's just sprained. So I went over, and I asked one of the camp guys, I go, you guys got any tape? He goes, I don't have any right now. I go, you got any duct tape? I'll take any kind of tape you need. So he comes back with some duct tape. And I literally duct taped my hand, and I went and continued to play this game. And I took the duct tape off, and a little later I looked at my hand, and I'm not kidding you, it was like this. It was just massive. Now, I looked at it, and do you think there was anything there saying that your hand's fine? I'm looking at my hand, and I'm thinking, this doesn't look right. But here was the problem. A week after this event, I had a big baseball game I wanted to play, and it was an old-timers game up in Philly, outside of in Pennsylvania. It's a Field of Dreams game where it was like, if you build it, they will come. And I have my whole staff there. It's this thing where you go and you get to dress in old-time outfits, and they have a pro baseball player there, an ex-baseball player. And I didn't want to miss that game because in my mind, I know it's broken, but I'm also saying, nah, it's not broken, because see, if it's broken, that means I can't play. And so I go, I'm playing this game. So I remember for a week, I'm hobbling around with this hand that everything is saying, broken, broken, broken. The other part of me is going, no, 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 I'm going to play in this game next week. So I show up a week later with my staff. I can hardly get a glove on my hand. But I want to bat. And there was a guy that used to pitch for the Mets named Ken Tewksbury. And he was still bringing a little heat. And I played baseball in high school, and I was convinced that I could hit this guy. And so I stood up, and I'm at the plate, and he brings about still an 85 to 87 mile an hour fastball, which I promptly hit. And after I hit it, I thought, oh my God, I almost fainted. The pain in my hand. I was like, oh my gosh, I've known this for a week. Why in the world? So at that point, I kind of gave in. The next day, I go to the hand doctor down at Chesapeake Hand Clinic. At Union Memorial Hospital. The guy takes an x-ray. I go into his office. He holds it up. I'm not kidding you. It is the shortest doctor's appointment I've ever had in my life. He literally holds it up. He goes, see you on surgery on Monday. I go, what? He goes, oh man, you just totally ripped your hand. You literally tore the ligament off the bone, the bone's off. I'll see you Monday. I go, how did you see that quickly? He goes, I do this for a living. And here's the point. He knew the truth in 15 seconds. I knew the truth for about 10 days and never wanted to face it. Now, I've also known some things in my life on a personal, you can say, well, Pat, that's stupid. No. What do you think else was involved in my not wanting to face the facts of what I actually saw? Any thoughts? Pride? Good. There's stubbornness, right? Disappointment, honest disappointment. Ego. Kevin, what are you going to tell me, Kevin? You're going to say that again? Spell it for me, bro. Denial? Oh, denial? Is that right? Yeah, denial. And what was a denial in? Was really ultimately my pride. Now, I could tell you a few more of these. Being a runner, runners are not the smartest guys in the room, if any of you know that. And we tend to deny entering things. But when you guys think of one of the major qualities or attitudes that causes all kinds of chaos in relationships, think of your own lives for a minute. When you think of marriages, you think of families, you think of international relations, you think of racial tension. You think of things that go on the playground. What do you think comes to mind when you think one of the major attitudes or qualities that causes all kinds of chaos in relationships? What do you think it is? What do you think a big one is? Pride. Would you guys say pride? Yeah? This is what we want to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about pride. And we're going to have a chance around the tables to do that, and then we're going to have a chance to also talk about an antidote to pride. But before we divine it, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to think of a person or an example in your mind right now that you can call it out that epitomizes it and why that's so. Could you think of your mind as an example of pride right now? And be careful because you might be indicting yourself a little bit. But just begin to think, if you like, can you think of a person or an example that demonstrates pride, and why would you use it as that as an example?
Pride negative?
Yeah, or whatever. We'll get to it. Yeah, Bob?
I know a guy, not saying it's me, who perhaps bought a car a little bit beyond his means because he wanted to impress the sales guy who was trying to sell it to him.
Say that one more time. There's what?
There's a guy I know
Yeah.
that was in a showroom, car showroom, bought a car perhaps a little bit above his means because he wanted to impress the guy he was trying to sell it to.
Okay, you're trying to impress the guy that's trying to sell you the car, and you're going to be the one paying, and he's going to make money off of your crazy decision.
Or wasn't he, be cool?
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Any others come to mind when you think of pride? Somebody that might have put it. Yeah, Scott?
Actually, this was a confession of my dad this week. My dad always wanted to go to the car shows. And he told me this past week, I don't want to go to the car shows anymore. And I go, why? Because every time I go to the car shows, I want one of those cars. Whatever it may be.
Okay, well
So he told me his pride was getting in the way
Okay.
of him not telling me that he didn't want to go to the car shows.
Okay, his ego too much. Okay, good. Didn't
Well,
want
he
to.
drives the 2013 Mustang red.
Okay, all right.
So,
His ego was kind of in it. Didn't want to come clean. Didn't want to. You see something inside of him that. How many of you maybe have kids that you don't want your kids to see something in you that may not be all that attractive and pretty to reveal? You know? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll use a good example, I think, for a positive side would be Michael Phelps, in my opinion, an athlete that's extremely successful to succeed at the level that he's succeeded at and continue to go back and achieve higher and higher ground over and over, higher and higher. I think that's a positive example of pride.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. We'll deal with that. Thank you. Just think again. Whatever you think of pride when you, again, it's positive and negative, right? But I want you to just think of, we're talking about things that destroy relationships. And so think about this. How many people have you maybe thought one thing about in your life, and then you've gotten to know them a little bit, and you've learned a little bit of their story, and all of a sudden your opinion of them changes with a little more of you knowing their story? Like that's a great example of your parent. You know, it's one thing, but then when you're in that place of being that person, I don't know one parent who gets up in the morning and tries to get it wrong. And being a parent, I can tell you, I know I sure didn't, but I also know I got some stuff wrong. And I can't tell you there's times where I've said I was never going to do that, and then when I was wearing those shoes, I actually did it. And let me put it to you another way. I swore that there were going to be things that I was never going to say to my kids, ever. And I've actually said some of those things to my kids. And we all can get to places. Let me give you, it's interesting, the Latin word to this word, this pride word is really, it's It's so crazy. It's spelled like superbia. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? Did a little work on this. And when you see that word, what do you think of? Like superbia. If you were to define it, somebody thinks what? Super or it's supreme. It really means a better or above. The Greek word means a high-minded boast. You know, it's a better or above, a high-minded boast. It's interesting, 1 John 2:16 says this. Let me just read this to you. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does. So where do you think that comes from? Like, man's boasting on what he has and does. What kind of life is that? Boasting about what he has and does. He's kind of forgetting that where what he has and does actually comes from. He kind of acts like he did it. Like maybe he's too big. He's bigger than he really thinks. The English meaning of this word, if you were to kind of put together the whole vision of Latin of being above or better, or the Greek minded being sort of a high-minded boasting, the English meaning means an immoderate degree of self-esteem or an over-evaluation of ourselves. It's just an over-evaluation of ourselves. Get this, but that undermines or oppresses somebody else. That I overestimate me at a point where I underestimate someone else and maybe even oppress them by my underestimating of their value. Does that make sense to you guys? This is where what goes on here actually can show itself in actions here. That I actually can think of myself, and I think it's really rooted in insecurity and not knowing who we are. That we begin to think that we're more than we are, which is part of what Genesis 3 we talked about last week. We got, too big for our own pants in a sense, that I'm no more than God. That I get an inflated view of me that then finds a way to devalue or even oppress others and feel okay about doing it. I read this thing last week. It says, the bottom line is too much of me or too much or misdirected love of self. It's too much or a misdirected love of self. And it said, think about this bumper sticker. I'm fat and you're ugly, but at least I can diet. Imagine when you think of it, man, I'm fat, you're ugly, but at least I can diet. I mean, you just get the spirit of that, right? It's something like you think, God, that's just sick that somebody would do that. But, we all play this game. You say, well, I wouldn't go that far. But, we do in other ways. We may have an internal scorecard that maybe evaluates another person's worth in a way that distorts how you and I see them. And so this vision, let's turn back to Genesis 3 just for a minute. And then I've got a couple questions that I want to give us to battle around the tables for a minute. I just want to go back again for a minute in Genesis 3, and then I want to tell you. In Genesis 3, we learned again last week that God created us when He did. He said it was very good with massive amounts of dignity, right? In a proper sense of self-love and our imageness. And when we were living, before it all kind of blew apart, who were we living rightly directed towards? This isn't a hard question. Under the Lord, right? There was a sense that everything we saw, we knew who it came from, right? And it wasn't us. That there was a sense in which we had been placed in a place. Adam even knew that this incredible woman that he'd been given was not his idea. In fact, his response to her was, this is way better than the idea I had. Like, she's way more than what I anticipated. And there was just this beautiful sense of living into our imageness, and we were called to rule and to reign and to have dominion over all that was and to enjoy it and to find our rights. There was no sense of pride or false sense of power or whose it was. We were rightly living under the authority of another until we began to live in this idolatrous way with our own self-love. That we began to value me more than the one who created me. Right, Phil? We began to pretend to be more than what we actually are. And we began to live autonomously. The word autonomous, you guys know what autonomous means? Yeah, we live as a law unto ourselves. We live independently, self-rule, in our proper esteem that was meant for God, we became independent and confused, and we even acted like we were superior to God, which is kind of crazy. And I asked last week, is there any pride in the garden? And how do you see it in the decision that Adam and Eve made? Where do you see pride being lived out in that particular instance? Any thought on the first major decision of mankind to go against what God had declared was good and all that He'd given us? How do you see the first face and expression of pride? Something goes on in here, but then it shows itself here. What's the visible sign of the pride? They actually ate, right? But what was going on down here that would make them do that up here? The desire to know what? What's going on? Huh?
Desire to be like God.
Desire to be like God, which is another way to say that I want to be more than what I actually am. That I'm going to want to be more and act like I can deal with more than I've been told I can deal with well. Do you ever think God, because He loved us, had to give us the freedom to say no to His yes? But there were things that we were created to never know because we couldn't handle it. How many of you guys have ever heard of this tree called a banyan tree? B-A-N-Y-O-N. Have you guys ever heard of a banyan tree? Do you know anything about it, Gary? You just heard of it? Okay, in a song. Let me tell you about the banyan tree. This is crazy about this. In this tree, this is wild. Nothing grows in its shade. Nothing. And its leaves poison the ground, and everything within its reach dies.
Does that work on grass?
What's that?
Does that work on grass?
Yeah. If you want, nothing grows in its shade. Its leaves poison everything on the ground. Its leaves poison the ground, and everything within its reach dies. I would say this. It's a lot like pride. The negative side of pride. Negative pride doesn't give life. It kind of kills everything in its reach. I mean, how many of you are really drawn to boastful, prideful people that kind of leverage themselves among others and act with superiority and think of that there's some ways that they can use who they are, that somehow oppress or put others down, or they have this need, to always have this sense of awareness and adulation around them. I mean, it's kind of a crazy thing. It's not who you're always drawn to, right? Let me just remind you one more time, this vision of pride. It's this notion that we have an over-evaluation of myself that undervalues or even oppresses others. You could say a synonym would be conceit, and part of this because I know my story so well, I've never taken the time to learn somebody else's. And now in your table talk session, just respond to anything that we've talked about so far and what maybe has personally struck you. And second of all, I'd love for you to think about maybe a time in your life when you've struggled with pride and how you dealt with it. Did you hide from it? Did you go after it? How did it raise its ugly head, or does it in your life? What circumstances or people do you tend to find pride just kind of coming to the surface of your own life? Spend some time talking around this around your tables and see what you come up with. Again, I want to reiterate, we're talking about our lives, some of these, markers that we mentioned. We're saying we're all leaving relational markers wherever we go every day. People experience us, in a certain way every time they interact with us. And we're trying to lay out some of the markers that can be detrimental and hurtful. The things that we say we value. Our own self-image, our own esteem, relationships that we say we value that we could kill just because we hold on to certain things, and we're just trying to each week I'm just trying to frame it for us, one of these characteristics that can really create some havoc. And so this week we're talking about pride. And we're again saying that, pride isn't having, we'll see this in a minute, a right sense of dignity and value. It's having an elevated sense. It's an overestimation of who you are in relation to everybody else. And even to a way where you in your own mind and in the way you can devalue people that you don't even know. We make assumptions about people's stories that we've never heard. And unfortunately, we have power. We can even bring oppression to people thinking that I've got it figured out. And I would say one of if you can really tell this at times about pride is that it's not very teachable. When you sense an unteachable spirit, it's an unconfrontable personality. When it can't ever hear, hey, I know this might be weird for you to know, but you kind of didn't get that one right. And you can't hear it. There's always a defense going up. Again, pride often, is masking insecurity. And we struggle with this, don't we? We do. I mean, this is like real stuff. Let me read you a verse from Proverbs. This is an interesting verse. Proverbs chapter, thank you, Larry. Proverbs 3, verse 34. He, speaking of God mocks proud mockers, but gives grace to the humble. Another way you say God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. This interesting word here, he mocks proud mockers. You all may or may not remember this, but in the Hebrew vocabulary, they had more than one word for fool. They had 4. And one is this word for mocker, which comes, I think, if I remember correctly, from like a clown. They mock, they're braggadocious, they leverage that at the expense of someone else. And they even mock God. Like I'm in the place of authority. And there's an arrogance to it. But God says, no, God mocks proud mockers. I don't think in a way that he's trying to be, mean. But, why do you think God opposes the proud? Do you ever think that God's just, I got to show that proud guy. I got to put that guy in his place. Do you think God has to put anybody in their place?
He wants a relationship, and in order to get the relationship, he's got to break through that man-centered idolatry and pride.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the primary characteristic of his enemy.
Yeah.
Pride.
The evil one is prideful, right? And so here's the deal. If God's going to break through in our life, there's certain things he's against, things that are against you. There's things in you God's against because you actually are fighting you. Me too. There's times I look in the mirror and I go, I got 2 enemies for sure. The evil one, I got another one, and I'm fighting me. It isn't like I don't know what needs to be. There's times where recently I was in a situation with my wife, and like you were saying, well, I knew what I needed to do, but I fought it for hours before I actually said, just do it, dude. Like you need to go up and talk about this. And if you said, well, what kept me from it? I could say, well, it just wasn't the right time, and I needed to wait the right time. And there was a part of that. But I want you to know, I waited beyond the time limit. And so, but then again, I don't want to excuse that stuff in me. I don't think the Lord wants to. I want to keep growing. And that's why we're talking about this. Let's turn to a passage, 2 passages I want to read with the time we have and make a few comments, and then we'll see where we end, okay? Galatians chapter 6. What was that again? Galatians 6, verses 1 to 5. And this gets a little bit at this, the right kind of... It says, brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him as though you're better than him because you know much more about how to live than that guy does. Brothers, if any of you is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual, and that word's interesting because I heard people go, well, I'm not very spiritual. And I remember saying to somebody, of course you are. No, of course you are. I mean, everybody's spiritual. Everybody makes decisions based on something. Like you have a spirit, right? Yeah. Well, then you're spiritual. Like you're doing something with that spirit. It's a cliche we use now, but don't get lost in that. I think that part of what Paul's saying here is he's rebutting Gnosticism and Greek thinking and Jewish thinking. They're trying to bring some of the law back into the freedom that people have in Christ, and they're coming up with this stuff again, and he's saying, no, we don't want to go back to what you've been freed from. And so he's saying, if any of you who are spiritual, you should restore him gently, but watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. Get this. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Each one should test his own actions. Then he can take pride in himself, not comparing himself to somebody else. For each one should carry his own load. What do you think Paul's trying to say to us? Be humble. Be aware, because you know that guy you're trying to help, if you get too arrogant, like, dude, you're not beyond it either. I mean, I'm telling you, when you say, well, I'll never, let me just tell you, how many of you have been close to doing what you never? I mean, I can't tell you that people say, I'm never going to do that again. No, you won't until the next time you want to do it. And you definitely don't want to do it now because you just did it. But another week you might want to do it because circumstances change and you never thought you could ever want to do what you ever just did. Right? But if anyone thinks that he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. I mean, it's actually possible to think that you're more than you are. Like, here's what we all are in this room. I know this is a crazy statement, but we're all actually human beings. And every one of us, when we get up in the morning, needs to brush our teeth and go to the bathroom. Twice. And when you get cut, you bleed like the next guy. And Ken Bowe, the guy that we were with a couple weeks ago, said, you know, we're all decaying, some gracefully and some not as much, but we're all decaying. And it's just the way it is. And so, you know, we need to get used to the fact that we are people that need help. And had God not visited and given some help, it'd be crazier than it already is. And there'd be no hope. But he said, and each one should test his own actions. Then he can take pride in himself. That's what I was saying. Well, like, be what you can be. I don't think God wants me being less than I can be. If he's given me 5 talents, I think he doesn't want me acting like I only have 2. And I don't think false, humility is saying, well, I really can't do that. Well, thanks. Like that's crazy. It's knowing where what you have comes from and using what you have to bring glory to the one who actually gave it and the benefit of other people. But you never lose track of where it came from, and you're very aware that it could go away as quickly as it got to you. Then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to somebody else. Just know this, whenever somebody else is becoming lower to make you or me feel bigger, we're on a wrong side of the track on this one. So let's take a look at Philippians chapter 2. When you guys think of humility, well, what do you guys, how would you define that? Say, maybe I just need to be more humble. I mean, it's a hard word to kind of come up with, isn't it? It's kind of like you know it when you see it, but yeah.
Best definition I ever heard was it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Good. Alan said this. It's not humility. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Let your playing do its talking.
Let your playing do your talking. These are all really good. You'll see this. Jesus did both of these. These are really good. The Greek kind of thinking behind this word has embedded in it lowliness or brought low. It doesn't mean meaninglessness. The Latin means of the earth. Humility means of the earth in Latin. Meaning it's kind of grounded. You're grounded. You kind of have a sense of who's who and what's what. And you know who you are and who you're not. And you know what is and what isn't a little bit. There is someone who is God, and guess who it's not? It's not thinking less of myself. It's just thinking of myself less. It's letting my actions speak. So listen to these words in Philippians chapter 2. We'll start at verse 3. Verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility, consider others better than yourself. Like that's a decision, right? It doesn't mean I'm not worth something, Tom. It just means, Tom, what I'm going to actually do, and here he's going to give us a reason in a minute, but I'm going to consider you more important than me right now. Because I don't have to win. Wouldn't it be great if you didn't feel like you always had to win or be the best? How freeing is that?
It's easy with Tom.
Yeah. But just say, like, okay, you win. It's hard to have a fight if you don't fight. And nobody thinks the guy that's just pounding on somebody that doesn't want to fight is like, man, that guy's really tough. Look at him beating the crap out of that guy. Yeah, the guy's like doing nothing. Listen, so he goes, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Each of you should not look to your own interest, but also the interests of others. Now here you go. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ. Now think about who really has something and who gave it up. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, meaning his godliness and all of his divinity. He didn't hold on to it and white knuckle and say, I'm not going to go down there, God, to that world we created. I'm not going to go down to these prideful little humans and do for them what they don't even want us to do. I'm not doing that. No. He made himself nothing and became the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. He made himself low. He was courteous. He became of the earth. He was incarnate. It's crazy. Therefore, then, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that's above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee would bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. You want a vision of humility? Think of Jesus Christ. Think of what he could have done. And think of what he did. That's called power and restraint. But not really, right? He let it out, and when he did, he just put people back together again, right? But then he actually allowed the crazies, humanity, who wanted nothing to do with them, to have their most prideful moment when he had his most humble moment, and he defeated their pride by his humility. Who wins? God wins. I think humility never loses. Just looks like it does. That's why God's opposed to the proud and gives grace to the humble. So think of this. Maybe that a healthy sense of pride is marked by gratitude for the gifts and abilities that you have. Humility is lived, as has been so beautifully stated, knowing where life actually comes from and being grateful for it. It's not thinking more of yourself or less of yourself than you should. Isn't that great? I don't have to make myself something I'm not, and I don't have to make myself, I got to make myself feel terrible. Like, no, that's not it either. It's just marked by this gratitude for the gifts and the abilities and the resources, and then the desire to use all of it, God, for your glory and awareness of where my life comes from and the blessings that I've been given. Therefore, do nothing out of selfishness and vain conceit, but in humility, and just consider others better than yourself. How come? Because I actually can. How freeing is that? No, you go first. That's fine. No, I'll get checked out after you. Go ahead. It's great. I can't tell you how many times I've actually tried this out, and I end up doing way better than I ever thought had I done it my way. I think an unhealthy sense of pride is marked by living like we're more than we are. There's just this air of superiority. You have no interest in understanding people's stories. You've judged them. You've got it. You understand them. You self-justify. You're protective. And it's rooted in deep disconnection from the very people that you value the most. Because you got to win. Because this thing's oriented around the wrong thing. And the one who loves us the most humbled himself to restore this back to himself, so we actually could be humbly strong people. You ever found somebody that's really comfortable in their own skin? Like, they're just really refreshing to be around. And you just see chaos going around. They just kind of know who they are. They just walk into rooms. They don't have to be known. They walk out. They just kind of live. And yeah, it's great. I know. Yeah. It's just really cool. And you change when you know you're loved. This is the beauty of this. So before we end, let's do this. I'd love if we could come up from what we're hearing tonight, let's just come up with like 4 or 5 maybe little nuggets of truth that we think could really help us maybe during this week as we see maybe pride surface in a situation, or we think something that might help us to go, okay, I'm going to go back to this. That'll help me just get back where I need to be again, because I want to keep changing. What are you hearing? What would really maybe help a little bit? And I'll write them down as a couple nuggets of encouragement that could help us.
Let go and let God.
Okay, let go. Let go of what? What are we saying? Okay, like I'm not going to try to always manufacture everything and control it. Is that kind of what we're saying? Saying, Lord, I'm going to surrender this to you. All right? I'm not going to keep trying to. Am I saying what you're? Okay, good. Will, were you going to say? Yeah, Bob, in the way in the back.
I don't know if it's recovery. It's hard for me to digest it first, but now it's okay to be okay.
So say that again.
It's okay just to be okay.
It's okay to just be okay. Did you guys hear that? It's okay to be okay. Or maybe another way to say it, it's okay to actually be 100% you and not have to be more than you, because you really are you. And so if you were just more of you, you wouldn't have to compete with somebody else, because you're probably doing that because you haven't fully realized you yet. There's a lot of you that's just wondering, what are you going to do with me? Like I'm going to put up in here too that they're let go and let God, because there's only one God. There is one, and it ain't you or me. And there's something really beautiful living knowing that we don't have to run the world and actually can. Yeah, John?
Talk less, listen more.
We're going to talk less and listen more. And I would say from what we're saying tonight is that you and I don't understand other people until we've actually heard their story. I'd say it another way, until they tell you you understand them. Like I think of times I've even said to my wife, honey, I get it. I understand you. She goes, no, not yet. Not yet, you don't. I'll let you know when you got it. And you don't have it yet. I go, really? No. Like we're about 80%, but not yet. And I think it's arrogant to think, it's prideful to think that I know what I don't know. Here's another one for me, is just practicing gratitude. Here's what gratitude reminds me of. It makes me realize I didn't earn what I have, in a sense. And even if I did. Well, where did you get the strength and the body and the intelligence and the insight to actually then go earn what you did? Where at some point you were not your own idea. You didn't create you. And everything, I think we can tie back. In Him we live, Paul says, and move and have our being. And if I can realize that life didn't originate with me, that's a good thing. Yeah, Phil?
You should have a feeling of praise, giving praise to God, for all that He's already done.
Good.
Just be in that spirit of praise.
Thank you.
And that goes back to Boa's sufficiency versus deficiency
Yeah.
mindset. But the one thing I was going to say is image isn't everything.
Image isn't everything.
Isn't everything. Because
Isn't.
that's what
Yeah.
Madison Avenue tells you. In fact, that was a great slogan from a great company. They made a lot of sales with it. Image is everything, but it's not.
Oh, that's good.
Image isn't everything.
Image isn't everything. I would say if image is everything, humility is everything, because you can change. When image is everything, you resist change. You have to already be the best, right? Kev? Don't judge. Don't judge right away. Yeah, good. I'm gonna put that, because that was really, that's really good. Don't judge right away. Huh? Patience. Kevin, can I use you as an illustration? Why not? Because Kevin, here's the deal. I'm going to whether you want me to or not, brother. Kevin and I are good buddies, and here's what I know about Kev. Kev wandered in here a year or so ago, at least. And I know this. Here's what I know about Kev, because when people see Kevin in his chair, people could think of Kevin a certain way. And they will miss Kevin. And here's why they'll miss Kevin. It's because they're prideful and they're scared. And here's the thing about Kevin. Like, he came in here, and Kevin, I don't know if you remember this, but he asked that one night, and Lonnie, you'll remember this. He goes, I mean, this room was rumbling, and Kevin asked this question, and I'm going to repeat, and the room got like dead quiet. Yep. He goes, ask the men what they thought of me when they first saw me. Now, you know, if anybody shared their thoughts, it could come across, if I wrote them down, like, man, you arrogant SOB for thinking that, you know? You know, who are you? And then you go, oh crap, like I was thinking that too. Like, what I'm saying is, he goes, and then you talk about, were you afraid of me or why? And here, because you don't know his story. Like, here's what I know about Kevin. Some of you may know that Kevin's married. He's incredibly bright. And he's looking for work because, see, some people think he doesn't bring much to the table. That wand on his head, that's dangerous right there, dude. That thing can get some stuff done.
And funny as all get out.
And he's hilarious. And he teases me to no end. But what I'm trying to say is, Kevin's a perfect illustration sometimes, and you think you know somebody's story when you don't really know their story. And when you do, you realize, man, there's this life there that, wow. And all I'm trying to help us say, and me too, is that I want to stay at the table more and have the Spirit of Jesus. Because if Jesus just went with the first story, there's no better chapters. If God just went with our story, instead of putting His story on our story, there's no more story, right? And so I think humility, when we live with that God isn't going to let us screw up His story because He's taking it across the goal line one day. And Easter is a foreshadowing, it's a reminder, it's a moving in that direction of the restoration that we're going to all know because God cares about this. But He was willing to lay aside His power and monitor it while He was here until that resurrection morning and infuse us with His Spirit so we can actually be people that walk with just this quiet but intense strength, knowing who we are because of whose we are. That's really cool, isn't it? And when you actually learn to know more of who you are because of whose you are, you don't have to win. Like you already won. You can actually hear like, you know, you screwed up. Oh, tell me more about that. Like, yeah, thank you. Or you could say, you know what, I disagree with you. Tell me more. I'm not sure we're on the same page, but you're not fighting to win. You're fighting to understand. It's different. Does that make sense? Good. So let me read this little passage, a few verses, and then we'll stand and do our memory verse. But do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Each of you should not look only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. And your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but He made Himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And being made in human likeness and found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And therefore, God exalted Him to the highest place and gave Him the name that's above every name. That's why our name isn't above every name. It doesn't need to be, because there is one whose name is. And we can belong to Him. To God be the glory. The most powerful person to ever put 2 feet on the planet was the most humble. That's staggering to me. If you want to be strong, it's humility. It's having a right sense of who you are and whose you are from Almighty God. Only one God. It's okay to be okay. It's to live in your own skin. Talk less, listen more. Gratitude and praise. Images in everything, for sure. And don't judge right away. Maybe this week, if you see the pride monster, you can think, man, where's something on this, Lord? Just go to the Lord. Well, let's stand and do our verse if we could. And I want to encourage you, there's some sheets on the table, and on there is an outline for next week. If you want to do a few little things for next week to prepare, we'll review next week pride, and we're going to talk a little bit next week about envy and jealousy. And they are a little bit different, synonymous, but there's a little difference. So let's do our verse. Here we go. 1 John 1, 5-7. This is a message we have heard from Him and declare to you. God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with Him, yet walk in darkness, we lie and do not live by the truth. But if we walk in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, His Son, purifies us from all sin. Amen.